Welcome to the Triclinium, a podcast named after the three-sided table used in the Lord's Supper, where you're invited to join the three of us as we think through matters of Christian faith, practice, and community. My name is Jacob Hawley. I'm here with my co-hosts Nate Lead and Eric Burgers. Today we're going to be discussing the role of church discipline. We're going to be discussing all the types of things that have to be accounted for and considered when we think about kicking somebody out of the church. Woohoo! I want to pass it over to, let's start with Nate. Nate, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really good. Lauren and I just got back from a little vacation, which was a lot of fun, and a good time to reset. We went with some of our high school friends from Oregon. Well, Lauren's high school friend who got married, and I'm friends with the guy, so we all kind of met up.
Nice.
On vacation, which was a lot of fun. So
where'd you guys go?
Yeah, feeling good. We went to Kauai.
Is that okay? Oh no, my geography brain is so bad. Please help. Please help us.
It's a Hawaiian island.
Okay, I thought so. Oh, okay. I didn't want to say it and then be like, no, you idiot. That's in Asia. Where something like that.
Yeah, you haven't heard of Kauai, Oklahoma?
Right, yeah. Exactly. Well, was it beautiful?
It was. Yeah, it was beautiful. So it's I could spit off a couple of random facts here or there, but it was super cool. It's there's very few people that live on the island full time, so everything feels like a small town. So you get there and it's all local shops, and besides the resorts and some of the chains, but most everything is just super local, and it was super fun. So got a little tan, got a little sunburned.
Nice.
Got to snorkel, see some turtles. We did a whole bunch. So got to go golfing on a course on the coast, which is really cool.
Ooh, that's
and I shot
cool.
my best game ever. So,
wow. When you say on the coast, was it in the sand, or was it next to the sand?
Yeah, so there was one, I think it was hole 13 or something, and there's the hole, or the fairway, sorry, and then there's a cliff diving into the ocean. So,
so you better hope you don't hit it off the cliff.
Yeah, yeah. And I was ill prepared, so I got there and I didn't have any golf balls, and so we were at the pro shop and we were checking in, and they were like, "Hey, do you guys need golf balls?" And we were like, yeah, we didn't bring anything with us, and because I guess a lot of people bring their bags and stuff, and they were like, "Okay, great, what?" Yeah, totally.
That's crazy.
Yeah, we actually saw quite a few golf bags be unloaded off the plane, a baggage claim and stuff. So it's a big golfing destination from
rich
what I
people
could see. Yeah, and so they were like, "Well, which golf balls do you want?" And it was a set of three, a sleeve of 3 golf balls. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna need a few more than that." And then there was a set of 6, and I was like, "Guess we're risking it. I might run out of golf balls today."
Yeah.
So I bought the 6, and then I found a ball in my bag that I rented while there.
Oh, nice.
And then I found a ball on the course, and
Perfect.
I ended with 2 balls.
You ran out of all of them, and you basically got 2 for backups?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so I
The
had
Lord
2
provides.
backups, and I hit all 6 away. The two I kept are the 2 I found.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
crazy. Those are
It
good
is
little
crazy.
souvenirs. It's like the manna that they kept when they were traveling through the wilderness. It's to remember
Yeah.
the Lord's providence in desperate times.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because I just had basic, golf balls that I bought from the pro shop, and then the one I found was labeled the golf course.
Nice.
So that was cool. And then I had another one that was labeled noodle. So I had the noodle
I've had
ball.
one of those before.
My noodle ball.
Yeah, you have. So I had the noodle ball. And then
I think
had
I
a
found
branded
it
ball.
too. I think I'm not even lying. I think I found it. I think
That's
it's in my
perfect.
bag right now.
I think I have a noodle too.
We're just a bunch of noodles.
my my grandfather and my uncle love to go golfing, and there was one time where he was wearing a Titleist hat, and I had never seen the brand Titleist before, and so I looked at it and I was like, what does that hat say? and I
Isn't
asked
that
him.
so true though?
I asked him, "Does your hat say titliced?" And and he looked at me with this look of just scorn and was like, "No,
Look at it.
it says Titleist. What are you talking about?" I was like, "Oh, okay." So that's how not into golf I am. So
Yeah, I used to pronounce the Jeep Cherokee as Cherokee, and my
Love it.
dad was like, "What are you doing? Like, stop." He would correct me every time.
The
and
Jeep
I would
Cherokee.
yeah,
Yeah.
the Cherokee. I'm going to throw it back to you every once in a while in the midst of our conversation, Nate, for kawaii facts. So just letting you know, every once in a while,
Sounds good.
I'll pop it back to you. Eric, how are you?
Nate's sitting here just thinking, like, whatever it takes to not talk about cohorses.
I'm like, one of these days,
The fatal
I'll
blunder.
bring it up.
Yeah.
You knew I wasn't gonna let it go.
No,
I saw you laughing during the intro. I was like, dude, don't bring it up.
go horses, dude. I love it.
Anyways, I'm fine. I'm frazzled this episode. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna like expose people as to why, but had a little scenario go down with some neighbors before this, and here we are. So now I'm just gonna try the whole time to get in a theology frame of mind.
As Eric was walking away from his neighbor, he screamed, "You're going on my podcast!"
I was just gonna say that. Like, this will get so much worse for you, okay?
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk about this on my podcast.
that 4 people listen to. They're all gonna know. Every one of them is gonna know about you. It is very funny.
Anyways, so that's how I am. Other than that, I guess I'm good.
All right. Well, good to hear. Good to hear.
How are you, Jacob?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I got to
No,
go
we
to
don't
a-
want to know how Jacob's doing.
All right. So today we're going to be talking about church discipline.
Dang.
How are you doing, Jacob?
I actually don't have much to say, so it's totally fine. I don't think I have almost anything to say. I did fall for a Instagram ad recently. I've been labeled, I think, in the algorithm as somebody who buys little games, because I do buy games, and I'm interested in games because I'm a young adult pastor now and used to be a youth pastor. And so there was this game that got advertised to me on Instagram of like this is like a I think it's called Magnet Chess. I don't know if you guys have seen the ads for this, but basically the idea is that there's this rope that's it's tied at both ends, so it's just a circle, like a loop, and you put it on a table, and then you put magnets down in the circle, and you take turns going back and forth putting one magnet into the circle. Eventually, the magnets, you're forced to put the magnet so close to another magnet because of just the crowding of the magnets that they'll stick together. The object is to keep them from sticking to each other. But when one of them jumps and sticks to another one, then you have to take both of those magnets back into your hand, and the first person to run out of magnets wins. So I explain all of that because I just got that, and it's sitting on my table at home. And as I was thinking about it, I was like, I'm not even sure if I can make this into like a young adult game, but it's just nice to have. So Instagram won again.
Nice.
So we're going to talk about church discipline today.
I feel like we need to discipline you for that.
Yeah, I know. Seriously, that my wanton use of money. So this is a. I want to like be careful, I guess, with this conversation, because this is an area of the church's life that, in certain, you could say, certain contexts, has probably been misused, and there's probably people out there who have been hurt by somebody misusing the authority that Christ has given them to, let's say, move them out of the church or keep them from communion for a time. So, I guess, like, we should maybe proceed into this with caution. I believe that the main text that we'll probably be talking about today is Matthew 18. Is that right? Getting that right?
Isn't there something in 1 Corinthians as well? I said that way far away from the mic, so just to make sure that was caught. Isn't there something from First Corinthians as well?
He's like, sounds like he's like on a lost island somewhere.
Yeah.
That's First Corinthians. Yeah, I think you're right. Why don't you go and look up the First Corinthians one? I'll read from Matthew 18 to begin us. I'm going to read out of the NIV. It says, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you, that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I with them. Now, the NIV breaks these up, where it's the first part is talking about the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, go to the church. If they refuse to listen to you, treat them as you would a pagan or tax collector. Then the next part is, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then the next part is, if 2 or 3 of you agree on earth about anything, it'll be done for them by my Father in heaven. The reason it's important for me to bring that up is because there is a ongoing critique of the phrase that's used regularly and quoted out of context, that where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I will be also. Oftentimes that's quoted as a way of saying, like, see, people make reference to this passage as if it's talking about, like, I don't know,
some church in my garage.
Right, yeah, we can have church in my garage, or some mystical thing, or like, when where like 2 or 3 pray about something, then it will definitely happen, or something like that. And that actually it's referring to and is in logical sequence with this idea of church discipline. And I actually think that they are separate ideas. I'm not entirely sure on it, but the way that I read it, I actually do think that there is a break in the logic. So that that part about the 2 of you agreeing on earth about anything they ask for, I think that it is a logical move away from the last, or is kind of you might say it's a universalizing of the principle that undergirds the other 2. It's a recognition that, like, the reason why what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and the reason why you should come together and decide about each other if you've sinned, is because where 2 or 3 of you are gathered on earth, I will be there also. Where you ask these things, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. So I actually do think that it is a broader principle to kind of push back on all the people who heretic hunt and proof text hunt out there. But anyhow, that's just my own little spiel. Any thoughts on that?
I don't have any initial thoughts. That was pretty straightforward from what you said.
Okay.
I remembered not the exact numbers of the text, but I did remember the passage I was talking about in 1 Corinthians, and then I found it. It's 1 Corinthians 5, starting in verse 1. I'm not going to read it.
This is the man with his stepmom, yeah?
Yep. This is what came to mind for me, which is related. It's not quite like Matthew 18, which is more of like a direct process by which to handle disciplinary action in the church. Rather, it's a situation in which Paul is like telling the Corinthians, like, deal with this, like, discipline this person. Not only discipline him, throw him out of the church, remove him from among you, is what he says, is how it's translated. So, and it seems like there's similar things going on in Titus 3 and in Galatians 6 as well. Galatians 6 is interesting. I will read this one because it's much more gentle than some of the other ones. It says, "Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted." So kind of a different tone, I guess you could say, than like 1 Corinthians 5, which is like, a man has his father's wife, like get him out of the church.
Yeah.
And then Titus 3 is like, a person who stirs up division after warning him once or twice, have nothing more to do with him.
Yeah.
A little bit more harsh in tone, whereas Galatians 6 is a little more gentle. And I'm sure you could, I might argue Matthew 18 is very gentle, in my opinion, as well. So there seems to be a balance as to how church discipline is to be handled and how it's to come about when it's necessary within the church. And I think that, keeping in mind what you stated at the beginning and wanting to be careful about how we approach this topic, it's important to keep these texts as a harmonistic standard to bear in mind when church discipline is coming about or in a situation within the church. Because on the one hand, you have texts like Galatians 6 and Matthew 18 that's encouraging gentleness. This is a human being that we're dealing with. And the goal in church discipline isn't to just destroy an individual and throw them out and cast them into hell, essentially, ourselves. The goal is restoration. Like, isn't that in step with why Christ came in the first place? Like, that should be the hope and the prayer of anybody involved in carrying out church discipline, is restoration.
Yeah, for sure.
Reconciliation is probably a better word. But nevertheless, texts like Titus and 1 Corinthians 5, and I'm sure others, also keep it in check that, sometimes it is necessary to be a bit more firm, or to address something as it should be. If it's more heinous of a sin that's needing to be addressed, that's going to cause elders, hopefully, if it's being done properly, to take a bit more of a direct and firm approach, and to really, if somebody needs to be rebuked or reprimanded, then let it be done.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have the text that we want to be gentle as well where we can. So, sorry, that was a long spiel, but I think it's important to see the whole point of view when we're talking about being sensitive to church discipline.
So it sounds to me like the way that you're kind of counseling us is to fail towards gentleness, meaning like if in doubt between being harsh and being gentle, fail towards gentle. Choose gentleness. I'm trying to think of a better way to phrase it.
I see what you're saying.
You get what I mean.
I totally get what you mean. To be honest with you, I'm not even really sure that that's the framework I'm trying to lay out, although I would hope that would be the case. Hopefully that makes sense to you. And the reason I say it that way is because I'm not sure that the first thing I would want elders to think, if, say, like, there's like an actual like crime, like a heinous crime or something committed by somebody within the church body, and considering not only that person that you're dealing with who's going to receive the discipline as well, like you have to remember, like, sin never just affects one person, it affects multiple people, and like no matter what, it's never done alone. And so you have to also, let's say a crime is committed, like I'm saying, you also have to consider the crime is committed against, and their feelings and their thoughts towards the situation as well. Because let's say you took that principle I just said, like be gentle all of the time, and you're the victim in that situation, and the elders go to him like, hey buddy, like it's okay, like let's try to figure this out. I would be offended if I was that person. And that seems somewhat unjust in a certain sense, I guess you could say.
That's a good point.
Unjust, rather.
That's
so I'm not trying to lay the framework that like gentleness is the backdrop, although I would hope that gentleness can be attained I hope that it could in any circumstance, but I'm not trying to say that it's always the backdrop. So it's circumstantial, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, that for sure. So just requires prudence and discernment. Now, okay, so here's a question that we might begin to disagree on, or like kind of have to navigate together. Who is it that makes the final call on you're out of the church, you're in the church, right? Like if let's say I wasn't a pastor, and I get let's say gossiped about really bad. Rumors are spread. And I decide, let's say me and my small group that I'm a part of, all decide that this other person is definitely in the wrong. We go to them, we do the Matthew 18 principle. I go first, then I take a brother along, then I take, a brother and a sister and another sister along, and we confront this other person. And each time they're reluctant to say that they did anything wrong. Can I just say, I don't consider you a part of the church? Or do I have to go to the elders and be like, well, please get involved? Like, because in Matthew 18, it doesn't sound like he's talking specifically about, like, anybody within the hierarchy. It sounds like it's a pretty general principle. However, he's also talking to the apostles, so maybe there's, like, kind of the assumption that the apostolic authority is there. But in that case, does that mean that the elders are the only ones that are supposed to confront? Do the lay have any responsibility to confront if it is the elders? That's kind of the problem I'm laying out. So,
yeah. I feel like even before we get to that and the question of like who carries it out, I think first it'd be helpful to kind of talk about when it should be carried out, because I think we're talking about two different areas of church discipline. I think for one, there's church discipline that is carried out by the church, the formal like organization of the church, and then there's also like, I don't know if it would be called discipline, but it's like the approaching of one congregant to another, like.
Oh, good clarification. Keep going.
So like, so I would just pose that question to you guys. So we're talking about church discipline. We're talking about the more formal version of it. So before we get to who, whether it's like a specific, if it's pastor, elder, church body, a group of people or whatever, like when does it become a part of at the like church administration, like the church organization level discipline? Like, is it personal grievances? Is it like when it affects multiple members of the body? Is it an unrepentant person? Or, because it seems to me like my just like off the cuff thoughts are like an individual sin, or somebody that like a sin that doesn't impact other members of the congregant, like the pastor in Colorado who defrauded his whole congregation, that crypto scam or whatever.
Right.
He impacted the whole congregation. But if it's more of like a personal or familial level, it's like, does that get brought up to the church administration, or is that more like that's going to be a pastor walking through somebody with their sin, like almost privately, not in full front of the church? Does that question make sense to you guys?
Yeah, I think it does. Eric, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's helpful for Nate to highlight. And I was even thinking as we were just going back and forth just a second ago, Jacob too, is like, so hopefully I'll be responding to both of you a little bit. And what I say here is like, for one, you have to consider what exactly church means in Matthew 18, who that is, which I think is what Jacob was getting to.
Yeah.
And different traditions are going to answer that question differently. I think.
Bring him to the Pope.
Yeah.
right up to the head.
Right. And
I am the church.
then to Nate's point, like, I don't know, Nate, when you were talking, it sounded like almost you would assume that a little bit of a hierarchy in that scenario if somebody's being brought up for whatever it is. And then you're asking the question, when do we bring up whatever we're talking about? Like at what point in time is it like that we execute the steps that are to be taken in Matthew 18? Like, when is it necessary? Is every sin necessary in that?
Yeah. That's a good question.
I'm not sure I have a a solid opinion on this one. I'm not sure. And we might even be reaching the scope of my knowledge on this topic, to be frank. But reading the texts, it sure Matthew 18 in particular, like, seems pretty clear that it has to do with an action taken against another person directly. Seems to be the context that's going on there. That can touch a whole litany of different sins that you might say that would make it necessary. I'm inclined to say that it probably has a bit to do with somebody's conscience as well, as to how that's supposed to be brought up, particularly in the frame of context where we're talking about somebody sinning against you. Like if somebody like said something that you thought was mean or something to you, but it's really like, okay, like I could just shake that off. That was mean. I didn't like that. I might talk to that person individually, and if they're like kind of non-respondent, like I can shake it off and move on. Some people might not have that ability in their conscience to do such a thing, and perhaps it's a bit more elevated in their minds than it is for somebody else as well. And maybe that does need to get brought before the church, brought before eldership, however you want to shake it there. So I'm not really sure, to be honest. That's just kind of my first impressions.
So it sounds like you're saying, let me just kind of try to summarize what you just said.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're saying, if I get gossiped about, it may be that it's insignificant enough that I go and confront the person. They're like, I don't even know what you're talking about, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna let it go. And then there's other times where it's like, this is a big deal, and I think I need to move to step 2, which is to go grab a brother and bring it closer. And there may be things that, like, once you get to a certain stage, it might feel like, would you say, like, unnecessary to go any further, even if they aren't responsive? Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Well, I'm not sure about that third part there, but 1 and 2 of what you just said, yeah, I think that's exactly what I'm saying.
What third part were you not? I don't understand.
The end of what you just said there, I'm trying to remember exactly what you just said.
Even if they're unrepentant, is that what you?
That there's a moment where it shouldn't go past, or where
it sounded like what you were saying is there's a certain sin, it's been brought up, but you could just drop it at some point if it's been brought up in the church. I mean, I guess theoretically that might be possible, but I'm more inclined to say if you're bringing it up to the church, and like I'm talking eldership and then possibly congregation in total, which would be a more Baptist perspective probably of Matthew 18. If it's going that far, like I'm not really I wouldn't really understand why it would just magically be dropped. That would seem almost.
No, I was just thinking like before you go to the church, like maybe. So let's say I get gossiped about. I go and confront. There's no repentance. I take Nate along with me. No repentance. Then I take Eric and Nate along with me. No repentance. And I go, okay, the next option is the church. I mean, maybe you don't have to be that rigid. Maybe you just keep increasing slowly. But at some point, you have to say, okay, the next step is the church. And there may be some situations where you're like, this is not an appropriate thing to be bringing up to the entire church. I'm going to drop it. Like, is that an appropriate thing?
Yeah.
Do you think you have to go the whole way?
Okay. Given the scenario that you just said, so being very specific as to what you just said, if you've already brought 3 brothers and they're willing to go along, or 2 other brothers and they're willing to go along with you, and you're that far in the process, it's clearly meant that much to you to get that far. Yeah, you're bringing it before the church, I would think. I'm not sure if it's that much of a grievance against you that you would take that many steps, and there's still no, and those other brothers are in agreement with you, and there's still no repentance, and they would agree that is actually what's taking place. again, it's the same thing as if you were to take that next step and then the church just magically drops it. I don't think you're magically dropping it at that point either. If
Okay.
it's means that much, I guess.
So
if you're dropping anything, I think what I'm saying is you're dropping it individually. Like,
Okay. So you might go and confront them, and then they're like, I don't get it. And then you're like, I'm just going to drop it.
yeah.
And that's okay.
That's-
Because it's between the two of you. You have the right to say, I'm not going to make this go any further.
I think, yeah, as a matter of conscience and whether or not you think it's actually like a grievous sin against you, I think that's up to the individual. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how to see it a different way. Perhaps you do.
Yeah. And I imagine, like I'm thinking in terms of we're constantly sinning as Christians. And this
Yeah.
process is a lengthy, time-consuming process. I've been a part of these conversations before. It is a lengthy and time-consuming. What time works for your schedule? Okay, well that doesn't work for me. Like, I mean, just like all that stuff. If it's insignificant, I do think that there's prudence where you can kind of be like, I think I need to just drop it for time reasons. Like, this is not going to. It doesn't make sense to keep pushing this, right? But yeah, I think once you've involved at least two other brothers and they're of the same opinion as you, it's at least something that needs to be kept in mind for future. Like, if it becomes a pattern for this person, then I would say, yeah, you got to bring it to the church.
Yeah, that's a good. Yep, that's helpful.
Yeah, so it sounds like there are a couple things emerging just in this conversation. For one, church discipline from an organization-wide level should impact multiple people within the congregation. So it typically shouldn't be on an individual basis, because an individual basis should be handled, individually, as people. So if Jacob sinned against me, then I go to Jacob and I confront him, and if that doesn't work, then I take a brother and then we talk with Jacob, and if it's still unrepentant from there, then a decision can be made, like, do we get a pastor involved or whatever. But that's more individual level. So in terms of like church-wide discipline, it sounds like it needs to impact multiple people from the congregation in some way. I was thinking of an example. Would you guys be willing to workshop a little with me?
Sure.
Okay. So I was thinking about it. I think gossip is a really good example. So I was trying to think of a scenario where it would impact a lot of people in the church, but it wouldn't be the discipline isn't coming from a place of like retribution or self-justification almost. So where if I'm sinned against, I don't have a personal vendetta to get this person punished, essentially.
Okay.
So I was thinking about keeping with the example of gossip. Let's just make up like a perfect scenario, essentially, and then we can talk about kind of where church discipline falls in the line. So let's say in a life group, a guy is gossiping or lying about a potential elder candidate. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The elder candidate's not in the room. He doesn't even know. This guy just is on one, and he's like, I'm just going to drag this guy through the mud. For whatever reason, we don't know his ultimate motive. Somebody else in that life group takes offense to that because it's like, hang on, I might know the elder candidate or whatever. I don't like what he's saying. He's going around to other people saying this. Like, this is obviously a lie. Like, let's just say he's saying things that are just so absurd. Like, there's just no way it could possibly be true.
Right.
So me as somebody witness to this guy sinning in the church and spreading lies, I grab Eric and we go and we talk to this guy and he's unrepentant. It's like, okay, but this is impacting a lot of people's view of this potential elder candidate, which impacts the church.
Right.
So then that's a scenario where I see us going to church leadership, involving a pastor or two, saying this is a situation we think that y'all should approach this guy.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's when a pastor steps in, or two pastors, and they approach him from a organizational administrative level, like from the office of pastor. It's a little bit more weighty than like if another lay person approaches. And let's say this guy is still unrepentant. It's like that. In my mind, that's when it would be appropriate for either the elder board to get involved or for them to for church administration to get involved to the point of intervening, talking to this guy, but then also involving the congregation, saying this is just a bald-faced lie.
Right. We were just having a conversation before that we started this podcast about whether it's bold-faced lie or bald-faced lie, or bald-faced lie. Sorry. And it's both. So you can take that and you can take that to the bank.
Yep, hitting on the heavy topics.
So, Nate, to clarify, your question, should this individual eventually be brought to the church, even though it's...
So my question is more so like, let's tailor a situation to the point where it affects a lot of people in the church. It's not out of self-retribution, and it impacts just like church organization wide. So at what point or what areas or when does the church get involved to discipline that individual who is causing basically havoc among the congregation? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that is you did a great job of painting kind of a perfect ideal for what church discipline, kind of a tricky place for it. I think
Sorry, I was just going to say, too, the reason I painted it like that was because, in my mind, it makes sense for church discipline to be on almost a tier system, where it follows kind of the Matthew 18 formula of we get a church administrator involved. I'll kind of answer my own question, and then I want to hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah.
We get one pastor or church administrator involved, or a staff person or whatever who represents the church. If there's still unrepentance, it's like we need to get either the elder board involved or like a group of congregants or somebody, something that's a little bit more weighty. It's like, hey, this is a big deal. And if that's not working either, then it's like, then we need to go to the congregation and explain exactly what's happening. That makes sense, at least in my mind, from a Matthew 18 perspective, how to use church discipline in almost a tiered system. That is working for reconciliation. It's not just, let's go after this guy, let's make sure he feels the pain for whatever he did. And then also so seeks retribution in that, and then isn't from a place of like a personal vendetta. So
right.
That makes sense in my mind. And again, it's one situation. I imagine church discipline is actually going to be pretty different based on the situation and the scenario.
Sure.
But in this scenario, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts.
Eric, can I ask a question of you that will help me understand where I think your answer to this question will go?
Sure.
Do you think that Matthew 18 is a rule or a freedom?
A rule or a freedom?
Yeah, so is Jesus saying every time somebody sins against you, go to them? Or is he saying, if you want a way to confront somebody in the church, here's how you do it?
Probably the latter.
Okay, that is my assumption as well. So what that means then is the basis of this is not like, if you don't do it this way, you're in sin, right? It's a permission. It's a freedom, right? This is a guideline for how to do it if you're gonna do it, right?
Yeah.
So,
but to clarify, I do think I think it's freedom to the first part, but then as he describes like how it is to be done seems more like a rule, I guess.
Sure.
You could say.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. That's fair. So if you don't get to decide how you do it like some other way than this, right? This is the way you do it.
Yeah, I'd like to obey the way Jesus said to do it. Yeah.
Great. Cool. I'm in agreement with you there. So what that helps me understand is like that there are obvious, you could say, vague places in this description where I think that I would lean on the side of being able to use discernment depending on the situation. I don't think that it's going to be like a step by step, follow this and you'll bake the right cake kind of situation. I think there's going to be some improvisation that needs to take place. So in the instance that you painted, Nate, one of the difficulties of bringing it to the church is you're now opening up a wound that wasn't there to begin with, which is this guy doesn't know that he's being talked about, and now he's about to know that he's being talked about. And there are times where that's appropriate, and there are other times where that's actually damaging. And so
yeah, right.
That opens its own chapter of questions, right?
Totally.
So, but this is good because these are the kinds of questions that come up when you. So in my church we had an instance of sexual sin, in and we had to respond to it because it was an unrepentant situation, and there were lots of conversations about like, be careful how much information you're telling to people who ask you about this, and like, be cautious to outline the steps that have already been taken and what the plan is for the next step that will be taken, and who needs to know and who doesn't need to know. Encourage people to talk to the person that actually needs to know or has the information to share. Don't just like kind of speculate, right? There was like tons of these like principles and rules that came with this, which is kind of to go to the idea that this is a sensitive area that requires, I think, a lot of pastoral discernment, regardless of whether or not you're a pastor. I think you need to have some discernment in how you navigate these kinds of things. Yeah, so I think that the way that you outlined it, Nate, would be a good way to approach this situation. If you get the elder board involved and the guy that's being talked about still doesn't know, and the elder board has confronted this person and this person is unrepentant, I would feel comfortable with the elder board alone making the decision to excommunicate or to exercise church discipline on the person. I don't think it needs to go to a vote of all 300 people in the church or whatever. Like, I think, and this is going to lean towards my understanding of the Matthew 18 and other church discipline questions. I do think that where there are churches that are elder led, I think, or priest led, or whoever the authority is in your church, whether it's many or it's few or it's one, I think that it shouldn't be one, by the way. It should always be several, I think. But
Right.
where there are several authorities, I think they should be the ones that have the freedom to exercise excommunication, even if not everybody in the church is on board with the decision. I think that the decision does fall to them. Eric, what do you think of that?
I would be curious to understand your rationale as to why the elders would have such authority to do that. And the way I don't know, to be frank with you, I don't know my personal conviction on this yet. So I would be curious to hear from you for that reason. But I can tell you how I think my church right now would handle such a situation, and I don't think it's in agreement with what you just said. I think if church discipline is getting carried out to that level in the scenario that Nate said, it's going to a vote if it gets that far into a process. And that has to do with the church's view on ecclesiology, on the way in which elders function in their office, and a whole litany of other things as well. Nevertheless, to zoom it out a little bit and be a bit more general, Titus 3:10 and Matthew 18 for that matter, like, are directly related to the scenario that Nate gave. Like, I'll read Titus 3:10 again. It says, "As for a person who stirs up division, after warning him once and then twice, have nothing more to do with him." That maps right on to this guy. So,
Yes.
I mean, and keep in mind, this is Paul writing to Titus, an individual who is an elder in his church, and he's telling him how a church should function. So maybe that's where you would get your rationale, Jacob, as to whether or not an elder can make such an action, is the fact that Paul is writing to an individual elder in that circumstance. Maybe you can't interpret it that way to some people because of the broader canonical context, which is a fancy way of saying when you consider all the books of the Bible together, how it should make church discipline should maybe play out in consideration of church, which is the congregation, as Matthew 18 says. So there's a lot of interpretive things moving around here that I'm kind of playing with here to consider the scenario. But I think in response to what Nate is saying is like, number one, what initially came to mind for me is for Matthew 18 is like, when you're bringing one or two along with you, the one or two could be an elder, and then you could bring it to the church. So it doesn't have to just be some random person within the church. Yeah. It could be an elder himself, and then church could be interpreted as congregation, and then it goes to a vote if it becomes that necessary in that scenario. But then again, I could see it your way, Nate. I could see it more like a church being interpreted, I guess, at least if I'm understanding you right, as the elders making the decision if this person is becoming excommunicated, if you want to put it that way. So hopefully that all makes sense.
I think that's what Jacob was saying. He's okay with the elders.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
But it sounds like you would do a vote, though, in your church, Jacob, yes?
A vote with the whole congregation?
Yeah,
No.
Does your congregation doesn't vote on excommunication?
No.
Okay, ours does. So that's
No, our church is nearly 1,000 people. So to do that would be, firstly, to air the dirty laundry of somebody to 1,000 people who probably 900 of whom they don't know, which is, I think, like reproachable in its own way. No, so I would take it actually. I mean, yeah. So Titus is a good example of like how like highlighting the breadth and dynamics of governing as an elder. I do think that even the Apostle Paul being able to say, "Cast the sinner out from among you" in 1 Corinthians 5 is a way of saying, like, he wasn't saying go hold a vote about whether or not you guys cast this guy out. He said cast him out. You're like, be done. And I think that was an authoritative thing. Like, I think he was saying this is the end. Like, this guy needs to be taken out. Especially since he said, I've already handed him over to Satan for the destruction of his flesh, which I would love to talk about with you guys in a second here. But I think that there are times. So here's how I would frame it. I would say the church shouldn't vote on it, especially in bigger church contexts, because of it being unethical. Like, if I was sinning and really thought, like, kind of was dug in on my position, like, I still wouldn't want my business being aired out to, like, because most churches are at least like 70-ish people, right? That's a lot of people that just all of a sudden know the intimate details of some dispute that I've had with my brother. So I think almost as a grace, I would say the elders can make the decision. I think there's biblical precedent for it. I also think that I think that the church should be allowed to ask why this thing happened. Like, it should be an open what would you say? Like, the explanation should not ever be hidden, right? Maybe there are details of it that need to be hidden for privacy, but like, if, let's say, someone gets kicked out of a church, and then one of their friends comes and is like, bro, what happened? Why did my friend get kicked out? I don't think you go to that person and say, sorry, we can't talk about anything, it's all private, right? Like, I do think that you need to be willing to say, this was the decision, and here was our rationale, and here's why, and here are the steps that were taken beforehand. I do think that the first two steps need to happen, that it needs to be one person that goes first, then 2 or 3 people next, and then whoever the church is in your church will decide. I think the elders make sense as an intermediary there in certain contexts. I also think there are other churches, like smaller churches, where maybe you can hold a vote. But I think it has to be like almost bordering on like a house church. Like, I don't think it's good to do it in front of more than, let's say, 50 people. Because I just think it's a really, like, damaging thing to do to somebody. Like, to be like, yeah. So I remember having these conversations, though, when we were dealing with it at our church. I was like, it was the question of who counts as this person's brothers and sisters who needs to know about this. And one of the other things that like I think can be helpful, especially kind of as we put together some sort of a modern understanding of what the church even is in our megachurch situations and bigger church contexts, is I think whoever the life group of the person is, or the small group, or whoever, like I'm actually of the opinion that if you're not involved in some sort of a small group or life group in a church, you're basically not a part of the church. Like that's my like kind of hot take on small groups. I don't think that you can just say, oh, I'm a part of a church and
Church
just be
membership.
like, yeah, and just be like attending on a Sunday, listening to somebody preach, and then not having any close friendships or brotherhood or sisterhood where you're being like challenged or held accountable. Like I don't think you can escape. It doesn't have to be with that church. It doesn't have to be like, I mean, obviously there's flexibility, but I think if you're not in close community with a group of people that's like that, where you actually can air out some of the dirt in your life, I think it's basically like you're going to a TED Talk every week. But so within this conversation, I think that they need to be the first people to know about this thing. They probably should be the first place, like I would be comfortable to say that's the church that you go to, before you go to the elders or in tandem with going to the elders. Like I think that's the church that needs to know about this person's behavior or the decision being made. If they're a part of a 15 person little group, like go and tell those people and be clear and honest and walk through the steps and all that. And I talked for a long time.
Oh yeah, I think that's fair. I understand where you're coming from with regards to wanting the elders to maintain a strong position within church discipline. I see a lot of care both for the perpetrator, and just like maintaining a sense of grace and whatnot, and not airing out all that dirty laundry. And really that's grace also, I think, for the victim, of whatever happened. It's like, hey, we don't need to chat about this in front of everybody. I see a lot of care for people in that view, which I think is appropriate in certain situations. And I think that the caveat with this whole conversation is that, sin manifests itself in different ways and therefore requires different levels of just discipline, interaction, everything like that. So I think that the elder board can certainly maintain a strong office over church discipline. I think that in the most extreme situations too, I might be even using Titus a little wrong, that scripture that Eric just read, because it said for someone who stirs up division, just be done with them. That you could interpret that as an elder doing that, but I see it almost as a way to maintain church unity, to go to the congregation. So particularly for someone that impacts the church very broadly. So let's say it's a big church.
Yes.
Let's say it's 1,000 people, and let's say one or a group of people, one guy or a group of people are like, this pastor doesn't know what he's doing. This is ridiculous. Like, we need to break off and make our own church. Like, really actually stirring up division, which we know happens all the time within churches. I think that's appropriate for the elders to intervene, to talk with them, and then if they're still unrepentant, it's like, let's go to the congregation and let's talk about it, because it impacts every, even in the gossip situation before that we were talking about earlier. When I made up that situation, I was thinking in my mind that the elder candidate who's being talked about would have heard about it. Like, that's how widespread the gossip would have gone through the church.
Got
that
it.
The elder
Okay.
that the candidate would have heard about it anyway, and he's not the one pursuing church discipline against an individual or whatnot. So even in that situation, it's like a lot of people have been impacted by this. Even if it's 50% of the people, they're just gonna talk about everybody, and that might be, not talking about it from a church-wide stance might be detrimental to that person's character, because who knows, maybe that guy was actually right, or people are going to draw their own conclusions if it's not talked about from from an organizational level. And then I just had one other point too.
By the way, Nate, I agree with you on that last point. I think if it's spread to a place where several people outside of the life group or outside the elder board or outside of the person that's being affected have been affected by it, I think it's worth at least addressing it with all those people somehow. Like,
Yeah.
I think, as far as it goes, that's where it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I think that's a good, at least, model. Who knows how accurate this is, but I think it's at least a good standard to try and hold to. Like, for example, at my church in Oregon, our pastor had a moral failure, ended up having a romantic encounter with a congregant outside of his wife, and so it's like that is a situation where two families are involved, but that guy leads the church, so it impacts the whole congregation.
Yeah.
And so it was dealt with on a familial level, it was dealt with on an elder level, and it was dealt with on a congregation level.
Yes.
Because of the scope of it. So even though it was, I guess, a smaller sin, it impacted very few people directly. It impacts a lot of people more broadly just because of who that person was. So
Can I throw something
didn't-
in really fast on that?
one
Really?
second. Just to
Okay.
clarify, we didn't vote on whether
No,
what was
no.
going to happen. So, that it was very clear, like, hey, this is what's happening, and we're informing the congregation of it now, which I think is a good thing, too. For one, for that sin, it needed to happen, the discipline that was happening. But I think when, the other thing I was going to say was that when elder boards, when they enact discipline and then they don't take it to the congregation, I think that can also seem even more like distrusting or
Sure. Sure.
It seems suspicious.
Totally.
It does. It's unnecessarily suspicious as well, because I think that, hey, this is going to hurt church unity if we bring this to everybody. It's like, well, it's going to hurt church unity if you don't, because you're going to leave the rest of the church in the dark about, one, how you handle church discipline, and what's going to happen if somebody sins in a way that impacts a lot of people. So, that was all that I was going to say. So, Jacob, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to, sorry for interrupting you. I just wanted to
No worries.
throw in a quick, 1 Timothy 5:20 actually says, but those elders who are sinning, you are to reprove before everyone, so that the others may take warning. So you like, they're right in track there. No, I think we've had similar situations. I think there are like when you take something to the congregation, there's the tension of wanting to be open and transparent about what you've been deciding and all of that, and also not wanting to hurt somebody unnecessarily with how much you share, right? So I do think that there's discernment about how many details you share. If it's something that has to do with an elder or a pastor or someone of prominence within the church as far as like their voice is concerned, I do think you need to lean more towards the side of airing it in the open, because now maybe not everything, especially like with this little romantic rendezvous. I think you call out the pastor,
care,
right? You call out the pastor. Maybe you don't call out the person that they rendezvoused with, because how damaging would that be? You have this moral failing, and it's now everybody's business in the entirety of the church. You're known as that person. That would be horrible. Now, that's part of the job description, you could say, for someone who's a pastor or an elder. Like, they need to know that they're like, if they do something that's really damaging to the congregation, that they are going to get called out, or that at least there's the possibility, right? So he's walking where he knows, or where he's already committed himself to. He knows the stakes. But for her, like, that would be horrible, right? So I mean, like, there's degrees, there's discernment within all of this.
Yeah, totally. Eric, I would love to hear from you.
Oh man, you guys have given me so much to think about. So much to
Good.
There's so much. Well, there's so much there.
Yeah,
man,
it's a big
there's,
topic for sure.
Like, I find myself sitting here thinking, okay, like, how would somebody in my church think about what they're saying? I think I have some ways. I'm not sure if I want to like go that route right now. I think what I'm going to do is because I have a billion questions, I'm going to swing it back to what Jacob was saying initially. I just want to I want to challenge your view a little bit, Jacob, just to understand
Do it.
like what's going on, like, and because immediately what came to mind with your kind of, at least what you were, I think you were describing as your process for church discipline, it was the context of First Corinthians. So I'm going to ask you a question, and it's kind of going to assume some things, but I'm just curious, like, what do you do with First Corinthians in general? So we mentioned First Corinthians 5 has that passage where Paul is telling them to throw a certain individual out of the church. Okay. And I guess in the broader context, it seems like that letter is written to the congregation itself. So this individual's quote unquote dirty laundry is getting aired out to the whole church. And a pretty heinous one at that, that I'm sure that person would rather have kept under wraps. Like, what do you do with that under your view? Like, it seems like you would say that it's at least possible that the elders can just excommunicate this person, keep kind of the details private to not hurt this person, I guess you could say. And if necessary, I guess they could bring it up to the church that they excommunicated this person, but not really give much detail why. But I guess the broader context of First Corinthians, at least from what, in my mind, from what I can tell, seems to rub up against that. Do you see where I'm coming from?
I do, but I think the answer's in the text. It says in the first few verses, it says, "It is actually reported that there's sexual immorality among you, and of a kind that even pagans do not tolerate. A man sleeping with his father's wife, and you are proud." I think the congregation not only knew what was going on, I think they were almost like celebrating because the issue within the bounds of the Corinthian church seems to me to be something like a Gnostic heresy, where there was this idea of like either you have to be really, really harsh for your, like, as far as like your what you allow bodily pleasure wise, or you have to be just like completely whatever you want to do. It's to the wind, right? Like whatever you want to do. And there are a lot of elements that sound like it's like a kind of almost a warring between the two of those things, right? So in 2 chapters from now, he says, it is wrong it is not good for a man to have sexual relations with a woman, but for sexual immorality. And most people think that the first line where it says it is not good for that a woman, have sexual relations, that a man have sexual relations with a woman, that is actually him quoting the opponents, that he's like making a citation of what they've been saying, because he then argues against it. So no, I would actually say I think it's probably that they were proud of what was going on, and he was actually confronting, because right, let's see, I'm trying to think of when this comes up. It's in 1 Corinthians 7. He says, because of sexual immoralities, each person should go to his own wife. There were other people that were sexually immoral in the church. They didn't get excommunicated for being sexually immoral. The reason he's being excommunicated in this is because it sounds like because it was a sin that not even the pagans would tolerate, and because the whole church was proud of what was going on there, or at least a significant enough portion of them that probably the whole church knew. So in that sense, I would say I think the whole church knew. That's how it reads to me.
Yep, that makes sense. I was thinking as you guys were talking, and this is kind of flipping subjects a little bit, I guess, or flipping ideas a little bit, but something, I might just put this rhetorically. If you want to respond, go ahead. But like something to consider from a congregation who might hold to a more congregational style of church discipline, in defense of that view, like, you have to consider that perhaps airing out the laundry is the mechanism in which God intends to use to bring that person to repentance. Like, we've had a very negative view towards, like I said, quote unquote, airing out the dirty laundry. But let's just assume that the congregational view is like the view, like bringing it to to the congregation, like if that is true, then that would mean that doing so is like a great act of love on behalf of the church as a final ditch effort to bring this person back to repentance. So I want to heed the idea that yes, it could be extremely damaging to the person if the congregation is wrong about said scenario, and they genuinely wrong that person. But if they're right about it, wouldn't that be loving as the congregation coming as a whole to seek reconciliation and repentance with this person?
Yeah. Okay. I think you're right in small church contexts. I think that the possible damage that telling 1,000 people could cause is like way outweighs the possible pros of like God using it for their good. So in the same way that I might say like,
so let's end mega churches.
I understand your sentiment there. I'll say that. I think the mega church, this is why I would say anybody who's going to like a mega church or even any church and isn't involved in some sort of a community group is not really going to church, is not really a part of a church. They're going to church. They're not a part of a church. And that's actually where I would say too, like if you just have somebody that's coming and sitting in your pews pretty often that sins against somebody in your congregation, I think there's actually leniency about whether or not you even bring it to them, because I wouldn't even necessarily be able to say they're a believer. Because I don't know them from Adam. They're just sitting next to me, right? So maybe I would be able to concede to you, Eric, that like if by the whole church or by the assembly you mean the life group of the person, then I would be willing to say, yeah, I could see a church operating under the assumption that the life group will act as the determining factor behind the final step of church discipline. I think you need to have a good life group leader that's like kind of trained in those kinds of things for it to work. But even if they don't, I could see that argument being made. I just think that the damage that's caused if you now are airing it to anybody above really like, I might even say like 25 people. Like it gets really messy, especially if this person's sin is not something that necessarily needs to be known by everybody. Especially if these people don't know the person. I mean, like that would be, imagine if the one person that somebody knows about you is your sin. Like that's the only thing they know. They know your name and your sin. Like, I don't know. It just promotes a form of, a form. I think it's unpastoral, and I actually would say, I would argue it's almost unloving. Like I would say almost without caveat that it's unloving. Like,
sure.
Yeah. So this is interesting too, because that's a good question, Eric, and I think that it kind of goes into the next question that I wanted to ask, which is, how does the church enact discipline? You know, what tools can the church use in order to maybe guide somebody to repentance? So obviously we know that one-on-one conversations, talking about it with somebody, actually having that like pastoral conversation, that's one tool. And if to answer your question, Eric, and to kind of maybe talk with Jacob about congregation level discipline, I would say that for one, how a church enacts discipline depends on how unrepentant the person is. And I think that the congregation-wide level of distribution of information is one of the ways that a church can enact discipline, depending on how unrepentant the person is. Now, if a person is approached by the elders, let's say, because he was unrepentant to the pastors, and the elders say, this is a serious thing, we're going to call you to repent, like you need to actually like go back and change what you said because you knew you were lying or whatever. And the guy's like, okay, you're right. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go back. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell people I was lying, and I'm going to own up to my mistake, and I'm sorry, and I repent. That doesn't need to go to the congregation.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah. Never.
Like, that would be unpastoral to take it to the congregation then.
I think even in a congregational style view, that is in agreement.
Yeah,
with what
I
you're
don't think anyone's arguing
For
that.
sure.
That would be
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah. Right, totally. So that absolutely makes sense. If that person, again, I think maybe three things impact taking it to the congregation from a organization-wide administrative level. How unrepentant the person is, and if they are continually unrepentant, and the severity of the sin. So, if it is an egregious enough level of sin to the point where it's impacting tons of people, it's impacting the church in general. So how unrepentant they are, how egregious the sin is, and then I guess basically if the other methods haven't worked, right? So I think if in the worst case of all those scenarios, the person is totally unrepentant, the sin is egregious enough where it's impacting the entire congregation, or maybe a significant portion of the congregation,
Right.
to be flexible, and the administration, the people surrounding that person, they've gone to them, and the other levels haven't worked. I think that I think just based on human psychology, a little bit of tribalism, like our desire to be a part of the group, when somebody is excommunicated, I think that's a very effective tool that a church can use very, very sparingly, but effectively at saying, this is wrong what you did and needs to be addressed. So in a way, going to the congregation, I mean, that's, even just us talking about it, I'm getting a little like activated, just like, oh, that would be so embarrassing. That'd be so bad, for the whole church to learn about whatever happened, like that'd be so embarrassing, so bad, like all that. And we can just feel it, it's like that it's just kind of ingrained to us that we want to be accepted by the group. So to be unaccepted by the group, that's like, in hunter-gatherer level, that's like, that's death, because you need to be a part of the group for survival. So in like for social survival, so to speak, to not be a part of the group, or to even say, and if a congregation votes, we don't want you in the group, that's a highly effective tool for changing behavior. It's like all these people say, dude, what you did was so bad that we don't want you to be around because of the damage you caused.
Yeah.
So I think the congregation level is a highly effective tool that churches can use very sparingly, again, very responsibly, with care for both victim, perpetrator, and the whole congregation, which I think we're kind of getting at. But I guess that would be my pushback a little bit to you, Jacob, but I think we're aligned on a lot of things, and I think that I think Eric is too on the congregation level. But yeah, does that make sense, or would you disagree with that, Jacob?
No, I think that's good. It's definitely a matter of.
I felt
sermon.
like that fell in line with Jacob's own view, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Because the places where I don't think it's important to bring it up to the whole of the congregation are the places where the congregation isn't even affected by the sin, right? Like
Totally. Yeah.
I could see, like, if it was somebody who was, like we were talking about, like, spreading rumors, being divisive, and, like, was doing that in all the corners of the church, and then got excommunicated, like, I could see being, like, bringing that to the whole congregation, being like, by the way, we're asking so-and-so to not come back anymore, and the reason we're asking him to not come back anymore is because he's caused division in our church, and here are some examples of, and here's the steps that we took. I totally could see bringing that to the whole congregation. Now, for a vote, I don't know, like, just the idea of 1,000-person vote sounds like a nightmare. But
totally. Absolutely.
like I said, I think a better way of thinking about this in terms of like our big churches nowadays is through life groups, because that's closer to the size that Paul is talking about anyways. That's closer to the 12 disciples that Jesus is talking to in Matthew 18. It's just closer to the size that makes sense relationally. Like, I don't understand the purpose of bringing something up to somebody who doesn't even know the person involved. Like, that's where it starts getting like, this is just, it almost feels cruel.
On a congregation level or like an elder board level?
The elder board, I think the elders can know anything that's going on in the church, I think, because they have to have eyes out.
Right.
That's their whole job.
Yeah.
But if it's like opening it up to the laity, who 90% of them don't even know the person, and now the only thing they're hearing about them is this
Sure.
person's sin. I think it's cruel. So I don't think I could be
No,
on
that
board.
totally makes sense. I'm wondering. So I totally agree too. I think life groups are an integral part of just church community in general.
Mm-hmm.
So would you go so far as to say that church life groups would be able to like excommunicate someone?
I think you'd. I at least think, I think if it's a combination of the life group and at least maybe like 2 elders, I would say, I would feel comfortable with that. I think a life group doing anything without any talking to the elders makes no sense because that person just goes and joins a different life group.
Totally. That's kind of when I wanted to dig in a little bit too, just to clarify, because I was like, the first thing that came to my mind, just hearing,
bouncing around.
Exactly, bouncing around, but also like Survivor. I don't know if you guys watch Survivor.
Oh, voted off the island.
TV show. Yeah, well, it's like one person can turn an entire group against someone else.
Yes.
Really quick.
Yes.
And so I think, and that is supposed to happen in Survivor. I think in life groups, it's not.
No.
So
yeah.
I'm glad to hear you just explain a little bit more, and including some elders is super good to have an objective third person, third party looking into the situation and being able to speak into it.
Or at least less biased.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Eric, I'm interested what you would say to that from kind of, because you're kind of speaking from the congregational level or view, I guess. So that I'm interested.
Yeah, you guys have to. I'm gonna give a little background to myself to explain kind of where I'm coming from. I grew up in a church where there was no membership and there was no church discipline. Because how do you discipline somebody who's not actually a member of your church? Like, you could just tell them, don't come here anymore. But okay,
right. And who needs to be involved in that decision? And
yeah. So I've developed from a child from being no membership and really no discipline, church discipline, that is, to
Same here.
Seeing the the importance of membership and church discipline together. There has to be some actual repercussions, like some actual privileges lost if you're being disciplined and or excommunicated. And I just don't see how you do that with no membership, to be honest.
For sure. Yeah,
so
I was going to say that's a good argument for membership.
So I'm speaking on behalf of Congregationalism because that's kind of where that's the position of my church, I think, that I'm in right now. I would be curious, somebody who's more knowledgeable than how they might respond to you, Jacob. But I do know that there's even grievances that I'm sure that are brought to a congregational vote that I'm sure would trouble Jacob or that you would probably not find appropriate given the information and the views that you've espoused thus far.
Right.
So I'm speaking on behalf from what I know, and kind of in response to what you're saying, Nate, I think I see it both ways at the moment. On the one hand, you have to answer who the church is. That seems the most pressing question in the whole thing. Because if the church is the congregation, then Jacob's thought process doesn't quite make much sense, because it would divorce the church into smaller subcategories and smaller leadership categories, when that wouldn't be very warranted if church is supposed to mean the whole congregation. On the other hand, I like the discernment that's kind of involved in Jacob's thought process, because this is a tedious process within the church, and it needs to be handled with much care. And I'm with him. I don't want to cause unnecessary harm as much as he does. And I do kind of I see the advantages to just bringing it up to people who are directly involved with individuals, and perhaps it sounded like you were saying perhaps even bringing it to a vote with those people, if necessary, given
Sure.
the scenario.
I could see that.
I'm just like, I think where I have pause with that is, it seems like I don't know that I could justify that scripturally. That seems too atomized a little bit to me at the moment. I think how you get there, and I see the care that's involved with it in trying to employ that viewpoint, but I'm not sure I see that as a scriptural argument. And it seems like the big pause with you, Jacob, is when the church gets too big. Otherwise, you might not have a problem with congregational vote on certain things, especially if the church is small enough, in your view.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of my thoughts thus far. I hope that answered your question.
No,
I don't know if it
appreciate you
did,
speaking
but
to it. No. Eric, you always take such care with your words, and I appreciate that, because when you do speak, you are speaking from conviction, and I
agree.
appreciate that. I hope our listeners appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh man, I just feel like there
Oh,
are
you're
so
too
many
kind.
other. I feel like there are so many other ways that we could talk about this, and even talk about other methods that churches can, or other tools that churches can use to enact forms of discipline. Like an example, maybe if I'm just throwing one off the top of my head. If a sin offense is localized to a life group, maybe they're not allowed to be in a life group anymore, or maybe they have to change life groups or whatnot. Like that could be a very real level of like church discipline involved.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe somebody can't serve anymore, which would also show that serving and service teams are a privilege,
Yeah.
not a.
Well, yeah, that's a great. We should
not
talk about that
burden.
sometime.
Oh, dude, that was my bread and butter. That's all I did was service. So that
Yeah.
that I love talking about service and serve
Big
teams.
deal.
So yeah, so like that's another idea of church discipline. Obviously excommunication is that's basically death. It's like the biggest thing that a church could do is
The
like
final straw.
you can't come here anymore. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. Do we have time for any more, or we gotta wrap it up?
I think we could revisit it. I would love to talk in the future about go deeper into mega church ecclesiology. Like, how do we, in an age where so many churches are becoming kind of conglomerates, how do we understand the church unit? And like, should we even be calling those churches? Like, I almost want to call those conferences. That is just to kind of peak my view. And then to have it as kind of a unifying conference each week, or, whatever. And then to have something that's smaller, like a small group or a life group or a community group, being kind of the ground level church that's like a legitimate, it like is able to operate as a church, right? Has an elder that's the kind of the leader of the small group, you might say, and they're serving together, and that's where you confess your sins and like all those kinds of things. So we could talk about that another time. I think that would be a really interesting conversation, but I do think we should probably call it for now, because it's getting late.
Yeah.
We didn't even get to talk about Nancy Pelosi being barred from communion.
Right?
not-
Yeah,
But
Big
not
deal.
Joe Biden. Jeez.
Yeah.
I know, right?
Yep.
Jeez.
So anyway, because that was another instance of church discipline that I was thinking about, was the withholding of communion and the sacraments. And I was like that concept seems so foreign, especially to Protestant churches, because the elements get passed by at the thing compared to
Yeah.
Catholic churches.
I have to give a little. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
Jacob.
I was just gonna say, my pastor has said before, our lead pastor has said, if we do end up excommunicating someone, I won't accept their offering anymore either. Like if they give to the church, I will give it back to them because I don't want them. Like that's a mark of participation that I'm not willing to cross. Of course, yeah, communion is the same. Like, yeah, basically you're barred from participation in the body.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's a big deal.
What were you gonna say, Eric?
I think what I was gonna say is dumb, so I'm not gonna say it. So I'm
Wow.
good if you guys are good.
Oh,
So
Eric.
anyway, I only brought up Nancy Pelosi just because that's like one of the most well-known method or examples of church discipline. That's that was in mainstream media.
Talk about church and state
That's
next.
why I brought that up.
We'll talk
Yeah,
about church and
we
state.
could.
That'll come up.
Yeah. Following our conversation on discipline, let's talk about church and state.
Yeah, yeah. I excommunicate every politician. They're all gone.
All right. Well, yeah, I think we're good. We're at an hour and a half.
Yeah, man. We talked for a while on this one. So, and Eric, any last thoughts from you?
I don't think so. I'm good.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to this episode of the Triclinium. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can do so at sophomorosofficial@gmail.com. That's SOPHOMOROS official@gmail.com. We'd love to hear some feedback from you. If you'd like to rate or review the podcast, that would be interesting. I would love to hear how people think about it. One of you four that's listening out there. Thanks for listening to this episode. As always, may Christ be exalted.